So many educators still are operating on the premise that in order to do inclusion, it really is that for teachers and school leaders, you do it if you kind of want to do it. We know that social change is not something that comes about because people want to do it. There has to be some kind of mandatory kind of accountability tracking that's going on. This requires a fundamental change, and change is difficult for most of us to engage with, but yet it must be done. No discipline, whatever is objective. There's a high level of embedded subjectivity about them. We may, in the United States, may think our way of doing it is universal, but that's not necessarily true. If you go to another country and another culture, they may engage in math and science in somewhat different ways, depending on their socialization and their view of the world. For the sake of argument, let's say that there is some validity to the claim of objectivity in math and science, even though I don't believe it, but for the sake of argument. Math and science educators still have to teach their subjects and disciplines to students. And how can they adapt their instruction, the conveyance of the content of their discipline to students so that students can master these? So if we are really committed to student performance and improving it, we can't get away from dealing with infusion and diversity. We simply can't. Whether it comes through the content of what we teach or it comes through the methodologies that we use to convey that content to the students that we're working with. Let's imagine that humanity in its totality is kind of like a community, a broad community. Not everybody lives in a community in the same place, in the same way, and all of that. What tends to happen is that the people that make up a community, they have kind of sub-communities within it, but they're still part of the larger community. And I think that's what happens with humanity. All human beings are not human in the same way. We have been socialized in different ways to embrace our humanity, to manifest our humanity, give it some clothing. If you're committed to serving humanity, then it suggests to me is that you're willing to serve humanity in all of its variations. That there is nothing in that mission itself, as is stated, that says that some humanity will be served and other humanity will not. Whatever you want your diverse students to learn, you can't teach them in all the same way because they're not the same person. The only way you could use a universal one way of teaching is if that you had a student body of clones. You can't assume that you can use one way of assessing everybody because, again, just as they learn differently, they also show and demonstrate their performance, their mastery in different ways. Your assessment measures ought to be compatible with the pedagogical techniques that were used. If one of those pedagogical techniques is critical analysis, at least one of the assessments ought to be critical analysis. I think we have made some progress on the input part, for example, on curriculum design, getting new diverse content into courses. But very often, we don't follow through the whole process and track that through assessment. And assessment goes in some direction that is basically inconsistent with the curriculum and the kind of instruction that we've taken. Diversity is the pulse beat of the United States. It always has been. And the curious thing about it is the United States is not getting less diverse, it's becoming more diverse. The problems that all of those things people talk about have happened in the past, those problems still exist today. Those challenges are still there. And some analysts say that they're even worse than they were back in the 50s and the 60s. Diversity in humanity and in the context of the United States and in the variation of the world is not going away. You simply can't remove diversity from the human family and say that you're dealing with the human family. Because if you remove diversity, you remove humans. So what have you got? There is no question that we need to diversify student bodies and faculty and staff, personnel. However, we need to be cautious and critical about how far we push that argument. Many of the issues that we're trying to grapple with were not the making of people of color and marginalized people. So why should the victim have to resolve their own victimization? The lowest people on the totem pole in the universities and colleges are students. As far as directing those institutions, students have no power to do that, or what power they may have, they're not using it. The most vulnerable members of the faculty are the ones that very often are expected to carry the weight of the diversity agenda, and that is the beginning professors. That makes no sense. If you really want to use the power of, let's say, of tenure and all of that to your advantage as a leverage around these issues, the 4 professors should be on the front lines. What we have to begin to do is diversify our construction of faculty member. We still assume that to be a faculty member, a person has to be physically in residence. And that doesn't make any sense in this era of technology. They could live anywhere, and they could come to campus through media. I don't know why we haven't begun to do that. So just as we think about we have to use imaginative techniques to teach in classrooms issues of diversity, we have to use imaginative techniques in recruitment and retention of both students and faculty. We say in the educational arena, one way in which you can do this is grow your own. Well, if you've got your own doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to find potentials to things to grow if you look in your back door, because your back door is the same as your front door.